The mare beneath her stumbled, and Victoria Hawthorne felt warm blood soaking through her torn skirts as she urged the panicked animal forward across the unforgiving Texas desert. She had been running for 3 days now, ever since she escaped from the men who had raided the wagon train near El Paso, and the wound in her thigh from a jagged rock during her escape throbbed with each desperate stride of her horse. The sun blazed mercilessly overhead in the summer of 1878, and somewhere behind her, she knew they might still be searching, though distance and determination had carried her far from that nightmare. Her vision blurred as she gripped the reins with weakening fingers, her body swaying dangerously in the saddle while the landscape spun around her in shades of brown and gold. The horse beneath her began to slow despite her urgent pleas, its flanks heaving with exhaustion, and Victoria knew they could not continue much longer. Her head felt heavy, disconnected from her body, and she realized dimly that she had lost too much blood. The makeshift bandage she had torn from her petticoat days ago had long since soaked through, and every movement brought fresh waves of pain that threatened to drag her into unconsciousness. She could see something in the distance, perhaps a town or settlement, but it seemed impossibly far away, shimmering like a mirage in the desert heat. Then her horse stumbled badly, nearly throwing her, and Victoria cried out as pain lanced through her injured leg. The animal whinnied in distress, wild-eyed and terrified, beginning to rear as it sensed her inability to control it properly. She was going to fall, she realized with sudden clarity, and if she fell out here alone, she would die in this God-forsaken stretch of Texas wilderness. Her fingers lost their grip on the reins as darkness crept into the edges of her vision, and she felt herself sliding sideways in the saddle. Strong hands suddenly caught the bridle, and a deep voice cut through her panic like a lifeline. "Easy now. Easy there, girl." The horse immediately began to calm under the firm, confident touch, and Victoria blinked through her swimming vision to see a man standing beside her mount, one hand on the bridle and the other reaching up toward her. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair beneath a worn brown hat, and his green eyes were fixed on her with intense concern. "Easy now, I have got you," he said, and this time she realized he was speaking to her, not the horse. Victoria tried to speak, to tell him she needed help, but her voice came out as barely a whisper. "Please," she managed before her strength finally gave out entirely. She felt herself falling, but instead of hitting the hard ground, she fell into his arms as he caught her with surprising gentleness for such a large man. The last thing she registered before darkness claimed her was the smell of leather and sage, and the sound of his voice calling for help. When consciousness returned, it came slowly, like surfacing from deep water. Victoria became aware of softness beneath her, the scent of clean linen, and a dull ache in her leg that was somehow better than the sharp agony she remembered. She opened her eyes to find herself in a small, neat room with whitewashed walls and simple wooden furniture. Sunlight streamed through a window, and she could hear voices somewhere beyond the door, speaking in low, urgent tones. "She has lost a considerable amount of blood," a woman's voice said, crisp and efficient. "Another hour in that sun and she would not have made it. You did well to bring her here so quickly, Xavier." Xavier. So that was his name. Victoria tried to sit up, but her body refused to cooperate, and she fell back against the pillows with a soft gasp. Immediately the door opened, and the cowboy from the desert stepped inside, his hat now absent, revealing tousled dark hair that fell across his forehead. He looked younger than she had first thought, perhaps 26 or 27, with a strong jaw and those remarkable green eyes that now studied her with a mixture of relief and concern. "You are awake," he said, crossing to her bedside in a few long strides. "Try not to move too quickly. Dr. Mitchell had to stitch up your leg pretty good. You had a nasty gash that got infected." He pulled up a chair and sat down, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "I am Xavier Jacobson. You are in San Elizario in the home of Dr. Mitchell and his wife. You are safe here." Victoria's throat felt like sandpaper, and Xavier immediately reached for a cup of water on the bedside table, helping her drink with careful attention. The cool liquid was like heaven, and she drank gratefully before finding her voice. "Thank you," she whispered. "You saved my life. I thought I was going to die out there." "What were you running from?" Xavier asked gently. "When I found you, you kept saying something about not letting them catch you. You were pretty delirious from the blood loss and fever." The memories flooded back, and Victoria felt tears prick at her eyes. "The wagon train," she said, her voice shaking. "We were traveling from Missouri to California, my parents and I, with about 20 other families. We were attacked 3 days ago just west of El Paso. Raiders, outlaws, I do not know who they were. They killed so many people." Her breath caught on a sob. "My father, he told me to run, to take one of the horses and ride as fast as I could. I tried to get my mother too, but the shooting started and everything happened so fast. I just ran like he told me to. I fell during the chaos, tore my leg open on some rocks, but I just kept riding. I did not know where I was going. I just knew I had to get away." Xavier's expression hardened, his jaw clenching with barely suppressed anger. "Raiders have been hitting wagon trains along that route for months now. The law has been trying to track them down, but they scatter like coyotes after each attack. I am so sorry for what happened to your family." He reached out, hesitated, then gently placed his hand over hers where it rested on the blanket. "But you are safe now. I give you my word on that." There was something in his voice, a strength and sincerity that made Victoria believe him completely. She looked down at his hand covering hers, rough and calloused from hard work, and felt an unexpected warmth spread through her chest. This stranger, this cowboy who had appeared like an answer to her desperate prayers, had saved her life and was now offering her protection without asking for anything in return. "I do not even know if anyone else survived," she said quietly. "I just ran. I left them all behind." "You did what your father told you to do," Xavier said firmly. "You survived, and that is what he wanted. Do not carry guilt for that." He squeezed her hand gently. "When you are stronger, if you want, I can ride back out there with some men from town and see if we can find out what happened to the others. But right now, you need to focus on healing." Over the following days, Victoria did just that. Dr. Mitchell, a kindly man in his 50s with graying hair and gentle hands, tended to her wound with professional care, while his wife Martha brought her nourishing soups and sat with her for company. But it was Xavier who became a constant presence in her recovery. He visited every day, sometimes twice a day, always finding excuses to check on her, to make sure she had everything she needed. Victoria learned that Xavier was a ranch foreman for the Triple J Ranch just outside San Elizario, managing cattle operations for the owner, an aging rancher named John Jameson, who had more or less turned over the daily running of the place to Xavier's capable hands. He had been riding into town for supplies when he spotted her in the distance, her horse clearly in distress. Something had told him to investigate, some instinct that proved to be her salvation. "I grew up on a ranch in Wyoming," Xavier told her one afternoon as he sat beside her bed, helping her practice walking on her injured leg. Dr. Mitchell had said movement was important to prevent stiffness, though she needed to be careful not to overdo it. Xavier's strong arm supported her weight as she took slow, tentative steps across the room. "My father was a cowboy, died when I was 15 after being thrown from a wild Mustang. My mother passed from fever the year before that. I have been on my own since then, working ranches across the West, saved up enough to buy my own place someday." "That sounds lonely," Victoria said, concentrating on putting one foot in front of the other. The stitches in her leg pulled uncomfortably, but the pain was manageable now, nothing like the agony of those days in the desert. "It was," Xavier admitted. "But you learn to be self-sufficient. You learn what really matters." He steadied her as she wobbled slightly, his hand warm against her waist. "I have always figured that when the right woman came along, I would know it, just had not met her yet." Something in his tone made Victoria look up at him, and she found his green eyes fixed on her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. They stood there for a moment, frozen in place, and she became acutely aware of how close they were, how his hand rested on her waist, how her own hand gripped his shoulder for support. Her heart began to beat faster, and not from the exertion of walking. "We should get you back to bed," Xavier said, his voice slightly rough. "Do not want you overdoing it on your first real day up." As her strength returned over the next week, Victoria found herself thinking about Xavier constantly. He occupied her thoughts during the long afternoon hours when she rested, and her heart lifted whenever she heard his familiar footsteps approaching her room. She looked forward to their conversations, the way he listened intently when she spoke, the rare smile that transformed his serious face into something almost boyish. He told her stories about his years working cattle drives, about surviving storms and stampedes, about the vast open country he had traveled. In turn, she told him about her life in Missouri, about her parents' dream of starting fresh in California, about the books she loved to read, and her skill with a needle and thread. "My mother taught me to sew when I was just a girl," Victoria said one evening as she sat in a chair by the window, finally strong enough to be up for longer periods. Xavier sat across from her, his long legs stretched out, looking more relaxed than she had ever seen him. "She said every woman needed a practical skill, but I always loved it beyond just being practical. There is something satisfying about taking pieces of cloth and turning them into something beautiful and useful." "My mother used to say something similar about cooking," Xavier said with a fond smile. "She could make a feast out of practically nothing. I wish I had paid more attention when she tried to teach me. I can keep myself fed well enough, but it is nothing fancy." "Maybe I could teach you sometime," Victoria offered, then felt her cheeks flush at the implication that they would have a future beyond these strange, suspended days of her recovery. "I mean, if you wanted to learn, as a way to thank you for saving my life." Xavier's eyes softened and he leaned forward in his chair. "Victoria, you do not owe me anything for that. Any decent man would have done the same." He paused, seeming to struggle with something internal, then continued, "But I would like to spend more time with you if you are amenable to that. Not out of obligation, but because I find myself wanting to know everything about you. You are the bravest, strongest woman I have ever met, and I have not been able to stop thinking about you since I caught your horse out in that desert." Victoria's heart soared at his words, and she found herself smiling despite the complicated circumstances of her life. "I have been thinking about you too," she admitted. "More than I probably should, given that we have only known each other for such a short time. But there is something about you, Xavier Jacobson, that makes me feel safe and seen in a way I have never experienced before." Xavier stood and crossed to her, kneeling beside her chair so they were eye level. "I know the timing is not ideal," he said quietly. "You have been through something terrible and you are still healing, but I want you to know that my intentions are honorable. When you are ready, when you are strong enough, I would like to court you properly, if you will have me." Victoria reached out and touched his face, her fingers tracing the strong line of his jaw. "I would like that very much," she whispered. Then, with a boldness that surprised her, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his in a gentle kiss. Xavier responded with tender care, his hand coming up to cup her cheek as he kissed her back. It was soft and sweet, a promise of things to come rather than a demand, and when they pulled apart, both were slightly breathless. "I have never felt this way about anyone," Victoria confessed. "Is it possible to fall in love so quickly?" "I think when you find the right person, your heart knows it," Xavier said, his thumb stroking her cheek gently. "And my heart has been telling me since the moment I saw you that you are someone special, someone worth fighting for, worth building a life with." Their courtship began in earnest after that, conducted under the watchful but approving eyes of Dr. Mitchell and his wife. Xavier was true to his word about courting her properly. He brought her wildflowers from the desert that bloomed in surprising bursts of color. He read to her from the town's small collection of books, and he took her for slow walks through San Elizario as her leg continued to heal. The town was small but bustling, positioned along the Rio Grande with a mixture of Mexican and American settlers who had built a community in this harsh but beautiful landscape. Victoria found herself falling deeper in love with Xavier with each passing day. She loved the way he always seemed to know what she needed before she asked, the way he respected her strength while still offering support, the way his face lit up whenever he saw her. She loved his quiet competence, the respect he commanded from other men in town, and the gentle way he treated animals and children. She loved how he made her feel both protected and empowered, never once treating her as fragile despite her ordeal. 2 weeks after Xavier had found her in the desert, Victoria finally felt strong enough to discuss what had been weighing on her mind. They were sitting on the porch of the doctor's home, watching the sun set in a blaze of orange and purple across the western sky. Xavier held her hand, his thumb making absent circles on her palm, a gesture that had become familiar and dear to her. "I need to know what happened to my parents," Victoria said quietly. "I have been trying to work up the courage to ask if you would help me, but I understand if it is too much to request. You have already done so much for me." Xavier turned to face her fully, his expression serious but determined. "I told you when you first woke up that I would help you with this when you were ready. I meant it." He squeezed her hand gently. "I have already spoken to the sheriff here and in El Paso. They are organizing a group to ride out to the site of the attack, to see if there are any survivors and to bury the dead properly. I will go with them, and I will find out what happened to your family. But Victoria, you need to prepare yourself for the worst. The chances of anyone surviving an attack like that are not good." Tears filled Victoria's eyes, but she nodded. "I know, but I need to know for certain. I need to be able to grieve properly to say goodbye if that is what I must do." "Then that is what we will do," Xavier promised. He pulled her close, wrapping his arm around her shoulders as she leaned against him. "I will leave in 2 days with the sheriff's group. It will take us about 3 days to get there and back, maybe longer depending on what we find. Will you be all right here while I am gone?" "I will miss you terribly," Victoria admitted, "but I will be fine. Martha has been so kind and I can help her around the house now that I am stronger. It will give me something to do besides worry." Xavier kissed the top of her head, a gesture that felt both comforting and intimate. "I will come back to you," he said softly. "You have my word on that." The 2 days before Xavier's departure passed too quickly. Victoria tried to be brave, to not let her fear show, but the thought of him riding into danger on her behalf filled her with anxiety. The night before he was to leave, Xavier came to say goodbye, and they walked together through the quiet streets of San Elizario, beneath a canopy of stars that stretched from horizon to horizon. "I am afraid," Victoria confessed as they paused near the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open desert. "What if something happens to you out there? What if those raiders are still in the area? Xavier, I could not bear it if you were hurt or killed because of me." Xavier turned to her, taking both her hands in his. "Listen to me," he said firmly. "I am a careful man, and I will be riding with experienced lawmen. We are not going out there to engage with raiders if they are still around. We are going to investigate the site, to find answers, and to return safely. I have every intention of coming back to you because I have finally found something worth living for." "Xavier," Victoria whispered, her voice breaking. "I love you, Victoria Hawthorne," Xavier said, his green eyes intense in the starlight. "I know it has only been 2 weeks, but I am certain of this. You are the woman I want to build a life with, the woman I want beside me through all the days to come. And when I return from this journey, I am going to ask you properly to be my wife." Victoria felt tears streaming down her cheeks, but they were tears of joy mixed with sorrow. "I love you too," she said. "So much that it scares me. Please come back safely. Please." Xavier pulled her into his arms and kissed her deeply, pouring all his love and promise into that kiss. Victoria clung to him, memorizing the feel of his embrace, the taste of his lips, the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. When they finally pulled apart, both were reluctant to let go. 2 days, Xavier said. 3 at most. And then I will be back and we can start planning our future together. Victoria watched him walk away into the darkness, heading toward his lodgings at the edge of town, and she pressed her hand to her heart as if she could physically hold him there. She had already lost so much. The thought of losing Xavier too was almost unbearable. The next morning, Victoria stood with Martha Mitchell and several other townspeople to watch the group of 10 men ride out. Xavier sat tall in his saddle on a strong bay gelding, and he caught her eye one last time before they departed, touching the brim of his hat in farewell. Victoria raised her hand in response, willing herself not to cry until they were out of sight. The days that followed were the longest of Victoria's life. She kept herself busy helping Martha with household tasks, sewing new curtains for the clinic, and even assisting with minor patient care under the doctor's supervision. But her mind was always on Xavier, wondering where he was, if he was safe, if he had found answers about her parents. She prayed every night for his safe return, and for the strength to accept whatever news he brought back with her. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, Victoria was hanging laundry in the yard behind the house when she heard the sound of horses approaching. Her heart leaped into her throat, and she dropped the sheet she had been holding, running around to the front of the house despite the twinge in her still healing leg. A group of riders was coming down the main street, and even from a distance, she recognized Xavier's broad shoulders and the way he sat his horse. Relief flooded through her so powerfully that her knees nearly buckled. He was back. He was safe. Victoria gathered her skirts and ran toward him, ignoring Martha's calls to be careful. Xavier saw her coming and dismounted in one smooth motion, catching her as she threw herself into his arms. "You are back," she gasped against his chest, holding him tight. "Thank God, you are back." Xavier held her close, his face buried in her hair. "I told you I would come back," he murmured. "I told you." After a long moment, he pulled back slightly, his expression grave. "Victoria, we need to talk. I have news." Her stomach clenched with dread, but she nodded, allowing him to lead her back to the Mitchell house. Martha discreetly left them alone in the parlor, closing the door to give them privacy. Xavier sat beside Victoria on the small sofa, still holding her hand as if afraid to let her go. "We found the site of the attack," Xavier began gently. "The raiders were long gone, but we found the remains of the wagon train. Victoria, I am so sorry, but we found your father among the dead. We buried him and the others properly, said words over their graves. I made sure your father's grave was marked with his name." Victoria had been preparing herself for this news, but hearing it confirmed still felt like a blow to the chest. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she gripped Xavier's hand. "And my mother?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "That is the other news," Xavier said, and something in his tone made her look up sharply. "We did not find your mother among the dead, Victoria. We searched thoroughly, identified every body, and she was not there." Hope and fear warred in Victoria's heart. "What does that mean? Could she have escaped like I did?" "It is possible," Xavier said carefully, "but there is another possibility. The sheriff believes that some of the women from the wagon train may have been taken by the raiders. There were several women unaccounted for, including your mother. The tracks suggested that a group headed south after the attack toward the border." Victoria felt sick. "Taken? You mean as captives?" Xavier nodded grimly. "The sheriff has sent word to authorities on both sides of the border and to the Texas Rangers. If your mother and the other women are alive and being held somewhere, every effort will be made to find them and bring them home. But Victoria, you need to understand that this could take time, and the outcome is uncertain." "But there is a chance she is alive," Victoria said, clinging to that thread of hope. "A chance I might see her again." "Yes," Xavier confirmed. "There is a chance, and I promise you I will do everything in my power to help find her. The sheriff said he would keep us informed of any developments, and if they get a solid lead on where the women might be, I will ride out again to help with the rescue." Victoria threw her arms around Xavier, torn between grief for her father and desperate hope for her mother. Xavier held her as she cried, his strong presence an anchor in the storm of her emotions. When her tears finally subsided, she pulled back and looked into his eyes. "I do not know how I would survive this without you," she said. "You have been my strength through all of this, Xavier. I love you so much." "I love you too," Xavier said, cupping her face in his hands and kissing her forehead gently. "And I meant what I said before I left. I want to spend my life with you, Victoria. I want to marry you, to build a home with you, to face whatever comes together." He paused, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold ring. "This was my mother's wedding ring. It is all I have left of her, and I would be honored if you would wear it." Victoria looked at the ring, seeing the love and hope shining in Xavier's eyes, and felt her heart swell with emotion. Despite everything she had been through, despite the grief and uncertainty, she knew with absolute certainty that Xavier was her future, her home, her heart. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." Xavier slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting all these years for her. He kissed her then, deeply and passionately, and Victoria kissed him back, pouring all her love and commitment into that moment. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling through their tears. "We should speak to Reverend Martinez about arranging a wedding," Xavier said. "Unless you want to wait until we have word about your mother." Victoria considered this, her heart torn. Part of her desperately wanted her mother to be at her wedding, to see her married and happy. But another part of her knew that they might wait months or even years for news, and she did not want to put her life on hold. "I think my mother would want me to move forward," she said finally. "To live my life and find happiness. We can have another celebration if she is found, but I do not want to wait to become your wife, Xavier. I want to start our life together now." "Then we will be married as soon as it can be arranged," Xavier said, his face breaking into a broad smile that made him look younger and more carefree than she had ever seen him. I will speak to Mr. Jameson about building us a house on the ranch. He has been wanting me to settle down, says a good foreman needs roots, and I will start teaching you everything about ranch life, if you are willing to learn. I am willing to learn anything if it means being with you, Victoria said. Though I warn you, I have never been around cattle or horses much beyond what was necessary for travel. Then I will teach you, Xavier promised. And you can teach me to cook something beyond beans and bacon. We will learn together, build our life together. The next few weeks passed in a flurry of activity and preparation. Xavier was true to his word, speaking with John Jameson about building a home on the ranch. The older man was delighted by the news of Xavier's engagement, and he generously offered a plot of land with a good water source and a view of the surrounding hills. Xavier immediately began working on the house in every spare moment, enlisting help from ranch hands and townspeople who had come to care about the young couple's story. Victoria, meanwhile, worked with Martha Mitchell and several other women from San Elizario to prepare for the wedding. Her leg had healed well, leaving only a thin scar that would fade with time, and she threw herself into planning with enthusiasm. She made her own wedding dress, a simple but elegant creation of white cotton with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Other women contributed a veil, flowers for her hair, and a small cake for the celebration. Reverend Martinez, a kind man who served the small Catholic church in San Elizario, agreed to perform the ceremony. He spent time with both Xavier and Victoria, discussing the sacrament of marriage and the commitment they were making to each other. Victoria appreciated his gentle wisdom and the way he emphasized that marriage was a partnership built on love, respect, and faith. Throughout this time, Victoria kept her mother in her thoughts and prayers. Each day she hoped for news, for some word that she had been found, but nothing came. The sheriff assured them that the search was ongoing, that the rangers were following every lead, but Victoria had to accept that her mother's fate might remain unknown for some time. It was a grief she carried with her, but Xavier's love and support helped her bear it. Finally, on a warm September evening in 1878, Victoria Hawthorne walked down the aisle of the small church in San Elizario to become Mrs. Victoria Jacobson. She wore her handmade dress and carried a bouquet of desert wildflowers, her heart full to bursting as she saw Xavier waiting for her at the altar. He looked handsome in his best clothes, his dark hair neatly combed, his green eyes shining with love and joy as he watched her approach. Dr. Mitchell, who had become a father figure to Victoria during her recovery, walked her down the aisle in the absence of her own father. Martha Mitchell dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, and the small church was filled with people from the town and ranch who had come to witness the union. Reverend Martinez conducted the ceremony with warmth and sincerity, and when it came time for vows, both Xavier and Victoria spoke from the heart. I, Xavier, take you, Victoria, to be my lawfully wedded wife, Xavier said, his voice steady and clear as he held both her hands. I promise to love you, honor you, and cherish you for all the days of my life. I promise to be your partner in joy and sorrow, in prosperity and hardship. You are my heart, my home, and my future, and I will spend every day showing you how much you mean to me. Victoria felt tears streaming down her face as she repeated her own vows. I, Victoria, take you, Xavier, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you, honor you, and stand beside you through whatever life brings. You saved my life in that desert, but you have given me so much more than that. You have given me hope, love, and a future I never dreamed possible. I will love you always with everything I am. When Reverend Martinez pronounced them husband and wife, Xavier pulled Victoria into his arms and kissed her thoroughly, to the cheers and applause of everyone gathered. Victoria kissed him back, her heart soaring with happiness. She had lost so much, but she had found something precious beyond measure in this strong, gentle cowboy who had caught her horse and promised to keep her safe. The celebration that followed was joyful and lively. Tables had been set up outside the church with food contributed by various families, and someone produced a fiddle to provide music. Victoria danced with Xavier under the stars, laughing as he spun her around, his hands warm and sure at her waist. She danced with Dr. Mitchell, with John Jameson, with various ranch hands who wanted to congratulate the new bride. But always, her eyes returned to Xavier, her husband, the man who had become her entire world. As the evening drew to a close, Xavier and Victoria rode together to their new home on the ranch. It was a modest house, just 3 rooms and a porch, but Xavier had built it with his own hands and with love. He had made furniture, installed a kitchen stove that had cost him a significant portion of his savings, and even hung curtains that Victoria had sewn. It was simple, but it was theirs. Xavier carried her over the threshold, a tradition that made Victoria laugh with delight, and he set her down gently in the main room. Moonlight streamed through the windows, casting everything in silver light, and for a moment they just stood there, looking at each other. "Welcome home, Mrs. Jacobson," Xavier said softly. "I like the sound of that," Victoria replied, reaching up to touch his face. "I love you, Xavier." "I love you too," he said, and then he was kissing her and Victoria melted into his embrace. This was her wedding night, the beginning of her marriage, and she gave herself to her husband with joy and trust. Xavier was gentle and patient, making sure she felt safe and cherished, and their coming together was beautiful and right. Afterward, they lay tangled together in their new bed, talking quietly and making plans for the future. Life on the Triple J Ranch proved to be both challenging and rewarding for Victoria. True to his word, Xavier taught her everything about ranching. She learned to ride properly, to help with cattle roundups, to identify signs of illness in animals, and to mend fences. The work was hard, but Victoria found satisfaction in it, and in working side by side with her husband. Xavier was patient with her mistakes and generous with his praise when she succeeded. Victoria also made the ranch house into a true home. She planted a garden, successfully growing vegetables despite the harsh Texas climate by learning irrigation techniques from Martha Mitchell and other experienced women in the area. She cooked meals that had Xavier raving about her skills, and she sewed clothes, curtains, and quilts that made their little house warm and inviting. In the evenings, they would sit on their porch together, watching the sun set over the desert while Xavier played a harmonica he had taught himself, and Victoria worked on her sewing. John Jameson became a close friend and mentor to both of them. The older rancher had no children of his own, and he treated Xavier and Victoria like family. He often invited them to dinner at the main ranch house, and he taught Victoria about the history of the area and the challenges of ranching in Texas. He also kept them informed of any news from the sheriff about the missing women from the wagon train. 5 months after their wedding, in February of 1879, word finally came. A group of Texas Rangers had tracked the raiders to a hideout in the mountains of northern Mexico and had staged a successful rescue operation. 7 women had been freed, including 2 from Victoria's wagon train, but her mother was not among them. The news was devastating, and Victoria spent days struggling with renewed grief. But she also found strength in Xavier's unwavering support and in the life they were building together. She wrote letters to the families of those who had been rescued, finding some comfort in knowing that others had been reunited with their loved ones. And she finally allowed herself to truly mourn her parents, to accept that they were gone, and that she needed to move forward. "I will always love them and miss them," Victoria told Xavier one night as they lay in bed, his arms wrapped around her. "But I am grateful for the life they gave me, and I am grateful that their last act was to save me. I think they would be happy knowing that I found you, that I am building a good life here." "I think they would be very proud of you," Xavier said, kissing her temple. "You are the strongest person I know, Victoria. You have survived things that would have broken most people, and you have built something beautiful from the ashes. I am in awe of you every single day." As spring arrived in 1879, bringing wildflowers to the desert and new calves to the ranch, Victoria discovered she was pregnant. The realization filled her with a complex mixture of joy, fear, and excitement. She told Xavier one evening after dinner, watching his face carefully to gauge his reaction. Xavier's expression transformed from surprise to absolute delight. He let out a whoop of joy and swept Victoria into his arms, spinning her around carefully before setting her down and dropping to his knees. He pressed his hands gently to her still flat stomach, his eyes shining with tears. "We are going to have a baby," he said in wonder. "Victoria, we are going to be parents. Are you happy?" Victoria asked, though she could clearly see that he was. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Xavier said, standing and pulling her into a tender embrace. "You have given me everything, Victoria. A home, a purpose, a love I never thought I would find, and now a child. I am the luckiest man alive." The pregnancy progressed well, though Victoria found the Texas heat challenging as summer approached and her belly grew. Xavier was attentive almost to the point of being overprotective, constantly worrying about her doing too much work. Victoria finally had to sit him down and firmly explain that she was pregnant, not ill, and that she was perfectly capable of continuing with most of her regular activities. "I am growing a baby, not dying," she said with exasperation mixed with affection. "I promise I will be careful, but you have to let me live my life, Xavier. I will go mad if you try to wrap me in cotton wool for the next several months." Xavier looked properly chastened, but Victoria noticed he still found subtle ways to help her, taking over the heavier chores without being asked and making sure she always had cool water to drink during the hot days. His care and concern touched her deeply, and she fell more in love with him every day as she watched him prepare for fatherhood with such dedication. Martha Mitchell served as Victoria's guide through the pregnancy, answering questions and easing fears. The older woman had assisted with many births over the years alongside her husband, and she assured Victoria that everything was progressing normally. Victoria made tiny clothes for the baby, her stitches careful and precise, and Xavier built a beautiful cradle from oak wood, sanding it until it was smooth as silk. In late October of 1879, Victoria went into labor. It was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next afternoon, but Xavier never left her side. He held her hand, wiped her face with cool cloths, and whispered encouragement when she thought she could not endure another moment. Dr. Mitchell and Martha attended the birth with calm professionalism. And finally, as the sun began to set on what had been the longest day of Victoria's life, their baby entered the world with a lusty cry. "It is a boy," Dr. Mitchell announced, placing the wriggling, red-faced infant on Victoria's chest. "A strong, healthy boy." Victoria looked down at her son through tears of exhaustion and joy, and Xavier leaned over them both, his own cheeks wet with tears. The baby had Xavier's dark hair and a scrunched-up face that was somehow the most beautiful thing Victoria had ever seen. "He is perfect," Xavier said in awe, touching one tiny hand with his finger. The baby immediately gripped it, and Xavier laughed through his tears. "Look at that. He is strong already. What should we name him?" Victoria asked. Though they had discussed several options over the past months, Xavier looked at her with such love that it took her breath away. "I would like to name him after your father, if you are agreeable, Thomas Jacobson, so that your father's name lives on." Fresh tears spilled down Victoria's cheeks at this gesture. "Thomas," she whispered, looking down at her son. "Thomas Xavier Jacobson, I think that is perfect." The days and weeks that followed were a blur of sleepless nights, endless feedings, and the overwhelming love that came with caring for their newborn son. Victoria and Xavier navigated parenthood together, learning as they went, supporting each other through the challenges and celebrating every small milestone. Thomas was a good baby for the most part, healthy and growing well, and he quickly became the center of their world. John Jameson doted on the child as if Thomas were his own grandson, visiting often and bringing gifts and toys. The ranch community embraced the growing Jacobson family, and Victoria felt truly rooted in San Elizario in a way she had not been able to before. This was home. These were her people, and she had built a life here that was rich with meaning and love. As Thomas grew from infant to toddler, Victoria and Xavier's life found a comfortable rhythm. Xavier continued to manage the ranch with skill and dedication, and his hard work was rewarded when John Jameson made him a partner in the operation. Victoria balanced motherhood with running their household and helping with ranch tasks when she could. She also became known in the community for her sewing skills, taking on projects for other families and earning money of her own that gave her a sense of pride and independence. In the spring of 1882, when Thomas was 2.5 years old, Victoria discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the news came with less surprise but equal joy. Thomas was going to be a big brother, and the little boy seemed to understand something special was happening, patting his mother's growing belly gently and saying "baby" with toddler enthusiasm. Their daughter was born in December of 1882, arriving just before Christmas. The labor was shorter this time, and Victoria found the whole experience less frightening now that she knew what to expect. Xavier was once again by her side every moment, and when their daughter entered the world, he wept openly at the sight of her tiny, perfect face. "A daughter," he said in wonder, cradling the baby in his large, gentle hands. "We have a daughter, Victoria. What should we name her?" Victoria asked, exhausted but happy. Xavier looked thoughtful. "I have always liked the name Grace," he said. "Grace Marie, after my mother. What do you think?" "I think it is beautiful," Victoria said. "Hello, Grace Marie Jacobson. Welcome to our family." Thomas was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything from diaper changes to feedings. Xavier patiently taught his son how to be gentle, how to hold the baby properly, and Thomas took his role as big brother very seriously. Watching her husband with their children filled Victoria with so much love that sometimes it felt like her heart would burst from it. The years passed with the kind of peaceful contentment that Victoria had once thought impossible. The ranch prospered under Xavier's management, and eventually John Jameson sold them a significant portion of the land, wanting to ensure that Xavier and Victoria would always have security. Xavier proved to be not just an excellent rancher, but also a shrewd businessman, diversifying their operations and building relationships with buyers throughout Texas and beyond. Victoria's sewing business grew as well, and she eventually hired 2 young women from town to help her with larger orders. She taught them the skills her mother had taught her, finding satisfaction in passing on that knowledge. The extra income allowed them to make improvements to their home, adding 2 more rooms as their family grew. In 1884, Victoria gave birth to another son, whom they named James. In 1887, a second daughter arrived, and they named her Catherine. Each child was a blessing, each one bringing new joys and challenges to their growing family. Xavier proved to be a wonderful father, patient and loving but also firm when necessary. He taught his children to ride, to work hard, to treat others with respect, and to value the land that sustained them. Victoria taught them to read and write, to sew and cook, to appreciate books and music and art even in their remote corner of Texas. She instilled in them the values her own parents had taught her, about courage and resilience and the importance of family. And both parents made sure their children understood the story of how their mother and father had met, how a desperate woman fleeing tragedy had been saved by a cowboy who became her hero and her husband. Thomas grew into a tall, serious boy who loved working alongside his father on the ranch. Grace was spirited and clever, always asking questions and wanting to understand how things worked. James was quiet and thoughtful, preferring books to cattle but still pulling his weight with ranch chores. And Catherine, the baby, was sunny and affectionate, bringing laughter to even the hardest days. In the summer of 1889, something happened that Victoria had long since stopped hoping for. A letter arrived from the Texas Rangers, forwarded through the sheriff's office. It explained that they had recently broken up another raiding operation, and among those they had arrested was a man who claimed to have information about the wagon train attack from 1878. In exchange for a lighter sentence, he had revealed the location where several captive women had been held. Most of those women were long gone, either dead or scattered to places unknown. But the Rangers had been able to track down one woman who had escaped that location years ago and had been living in a small village in New Mexico, too traumatized and ashamed to try to return home. Her name was Margaret Hawthorne. Victoria's hands shook as she read the letter. Her mother was alive. After 11 years of not knowing, of mourning and accepting and moving on, her mother was alive and had been found. Xavier immediately made arrangements for them to travel to New Mexico to bring her mother home. They left the children in the capable care of Martha Mitchell and John Jameson, though it broke Victoria's heart to be separated from them, even for the necessary weeks of travel. But she needed to see her mother, to know for certain that this was real. The journey to the small village near Santa Fe took a week of hard riding. Victoria's heart pounded with anxiety and anticipation as they approached the modest adobe house where the Rangers had said her mother was staying. What would she say? What would her mother look like after 11 years of captivity and suffering? Would she even recognize Victoria, who had been 21 when they last saw each other and was now a 32-year-old woman with 4 children? Xavier squeezed her hand as they dismounted in front of the house. "I am right here with you," he said. "Whatever happens, we face it together." Victoria nodded, drawing strength from his presence, and knocked on the door. An older Mexican woman answered, her expression wary until Victoria explained who she was. Then the woman's face softened, and she gestured for them to enter. In a small, neat room, sitting in a chair by the window, was a woman Victoria almost did not recognize. Her mother had aged drastically, her hair now completely gray, her face lined with suffering and hardship. But her eyes, when they lifted to Victoria's face, were unmistakably the same blue eyes Victoria remembered from her childhood. "Victoria." Margaret Hawthorne whispered, as if afraid to believe what she was seeing. "Is it really you?" "Yes, Mama," Victoria said, tears already streaming down her face as she crossed the room and knelt before her mother. "It is really me. I am here. I found you." Margaret reached out with trembling hands and touched Victoria's face, tears flowing freely. "I thought you were dead," she sobbed. "All these years I thought you had died in the attack or in the desert. I prayed every night that you had survived, but I never really believed I would see you again." "I am alive, Mama. I am alive because of Papa. He told me to run and I did. I escaped and found help." Victoria took her mother's hands, holding them tightly. "Mama, I have so much to tell you. I am married now to a wonderful man named Xavier. We have 4 children, your grandchildren. We have a ranch in Texas, and we want you to come home with us to be part of our family." Margaret looked past Victoria to where Xavier stood respectfully in the doorway. "You are the man who saved my daughter." Xavier stepped forward and removed his hat. "I had the privilege of finding her when she was in need, yes. It is an honor to meet you, Mrs. Hawthorne. Victoria has told me so much about you over the years." "And you married her. You have taken care of her?" Margaret asked, searching his face. "I love her more than my own life," Xavier said simply. "She and our children are everything to me, and you are welcome in our home for as long as you wish to stay. Family is everything to us, and you are family." Margaret broke down completely then, sobbing in Victoria's arms as years of pain and loss and loneliness poured out. Victoria held her mother and cried with her, grieving for all the lost years, but rejoicing that they had found each other again. Xavier quietly spoke with the woman who had been caring for Margaret, making arrangements and offering payment for her kindness. The journey back to Texas was slow, as Margaret was weak from her ordeal and needed frequent rest. But gradually, as they traveled, she began to tell her story. She had been taken by the raiders and sold to a brutal man who had kept her captive for 5 years. She had finally managed to escape, stealing a horse and riding for days, until she collapsed near the village where she had been found. The villagers had taken her in, but she had been too afraid and ashamed to seek out authorities, terrified that her captor would find her again. She had simply existed there, in a half-life of fear and sorrow, until the rangers had come asking questions. Victoria listened with horror and heartbreak, but also with admiration for her mother's strength. Margaret had survived. She had endured the unendurable and had somehow kept going. And now she would have a chance to truly live again, surrounded by love and family. When they finally arrived at the ranch, Victoria's children were lined up on the porch with Martha Mitchell, eager to meet their grandmother. Thomas was now 10 years old and trying to look grown up. Grace was 7 and bouncing with excitement. James was 5 and shy. And Catherine was just 2, clinging to Martha's skirts but curious. "Mama, these are your grandchildren," Victoria said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thomas, Grace, James, and Catherine. Children, this is my mother, your grandmother Margaret." The children rushed forward. Even shy James caught up in the excitement, and Margaret laughed and cried as she embraced each one. For the first time in 11 years, Victoria saw joy on her mother's face, real and unguarded joy. It was the beginning of healing, Victoria knew, not an instant cure for all the trauma her mother had endured, but a start. Margaret settled into life on the ranch with surprising resilience. She was gentle with the children, telling them stories and teaching them songs from Victoria's childhood. She helped in the kitchen and garden, finding peace in simple tasks and in being surrounded by family. At night, Victoria would sometimes hear her mother crying, and she would sit with her, holding her hand, not trying to fix the pain but simply being present with it. Xavier treated Margaret with unfailing kindness and respect, and over time, she came to see him as the son she had never had. She told Victoria repeatedly how grateful she was that her daughter had found such a good man, how proud Victoria's father would have been of the life Victoria had built. The years continued to pass, bringing the normal rhythms of life on a working ranch. The children grew, each developing their own personalities and dreams. Thomas eventually took over much of the ranch management, working alongside Xavier and proving to have inherited his father's skill with cattle and land. Grace surprised everyone by deciding she wanted to become a teacher, and Victoria and Xavier supported her dream, sending her to a teaching college in San Antonio. James discovered a talent for veterinary medicine and apprenticed with Dr. Mitchell before going on to formal study. Catherine, sweet Catherine, fell in love with a neighboring rancher's son and married at 20, settling nearby and giving Victoria and Xavier their first grandchildren. Through it all, Victoria and Xavier's love remained the foundation of everything. They grew older together, their hair going gray, their faces gaining lines earned through years of laughter and hard work, and facing challenges side by side. But Xavier still looked at Victoria with the same love and wonder he had shown when he first caught her horse in the desert all those years ago. And Victoria still felt her heart skip when he walked into a room. On warm evenings, they would sit on their porch together, watching the sun set over the land they had built their life on, and they would talk about everything and nothing. They would remember the desperate young woman fleeing across the desert and the cowboy who had saved her, and they would marvel at how far they had come, at the family and home they had created from that fateful meeting. "Do you ever regret it?" Victoria asked Xavier one evening in 1899 as they celebrated their 21st wedding anniversary. "Taking on a half-dead woman you found in the desert, taking on all her trauma and pain and complications." Xavier pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Not for a single second," he said firmly. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Victoria, you and our children and this life we have built. I thank God every day that I decided to investigate that horse in the distance, that I was in the right place at the right time to catch you when you fell. I love you, Xavier Jacobson," Victoria said, leaning into his embrace. "I will love you for all the days of my life and beyond." "And I love you, Victoria Jacobson," Xavier replied. "You are my heart, my home, my everything." Margaret lived to see her grandchildren grown and to meet several of her great-grandchildren. She passed peacefully in her sleep in 1905, at the age of 78, surrounded by family in the home that had given her back her life. Victoria mourned her mother, but also felt profound gratitude that they had been given 17 years together after being reunited. 17 years to heal and love and create new memories. Xavier and Victoria continued on, growing old together with grace and contentment. Xavier remained active on the ranch well into his 70s, though he eventually turned over the bulk of the management to Thomas and his other children. Victoria continued her sewing and her work in the community, becoming a beloved figure in San Elizario, known for her kindness and wisdom. They watched their children have children, who in turn had children of their own. The small house that Xavier had built in 1878 had been expanded multiple times and was now the heart of a sprawling family compound, with various generations living nearby and gathering frequently for meals and celebrations. In the summer of 1918, as they approached their 40th wedding anniversary, Xavier and Victoria sat on their porch just as they had done thousands of times before. They were both in their early 80s now, their bodies worn by decades of hard work, but their minds still sharp and their love still strong. 40 years, Victoria marveled, looking at the gold ring on her finger that had once belonged to Xavier's mother. "Can you believe it has been 40 years?" "Best 40 years of my life," Xavier said, taking her hand and bringing it to his lips. "You know, I still remember that day in the desert like it was yesterday, seeing you on that horse, barely conscious, blood soaking through your dress. My heart stopped when I realized how badly you were hurt. I thought I was too late to save you. But you did save me, Victoria said softly. You saved my life that day, and you have continued to save me every day since. You gave me a reason to live, a reason to heal, a reason to believe in happiness again. You saved me too, Xavier insisted. I was just existing before I met you, going through the motions of life. You gave me purpose, love, a family. You made me whole. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. Their great-grandchildren were playing in the yard, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. Somewhere in the house, someone was cooking dinner, and the smell of bread baking drifted out to the porch. It was an ordinary moment, peaceful and perfect, the kind of moment that had made up their life together. I have been thinking, Victoria said eventually, about writing down our story. For the children and grandchildren, so they will always know how we came to be, how this family started. That is a fine idea, Xavier agreed. Though I think they already know the important parts. That love can be found in the most unexpected places. That strength comes in many forms. That family is not just blood, but the people you choose to walk through life with. Those are good lessons, Victoria said. Important lessons. As the evening deepened and stars began to appear in the vast Texas sky, Xavier and Victoria remained on their porch, holding hands as they had done for 40 years. They had both lived long, full lives, rich with love and meaning. They had weathered storms and celebrated triumphs. They had raised children who had become good people, who had in turn raised good children of their own. The desperate flight across the desert in 1878, the blood, the fear, the pain, all of it had led to this moment, to this life, to this enduring love. Victoria often thought about that young woman she had been, terrified and hurting, certain she was going to die alone in the wilderness. If she could go back and tell that woman what was waiting for her, about the cowboy who would catch her horse and say, "Easy now, I have got you," about the love and family and home she would find, she wondered if that younger self would even believe it. But it had all been real. Every moment, every challenge, every joy, real and precious and worth every struggle, Xavier and Victoria Jacobson lived out their remaining years on the ranch they had built together, surrounded by the family they had created. When Xavier passed peacefully in his sleep at the age of 86 in 1920, Victoria grieved deeply, but also felt gratitude for the years they had shared. She followed him just 18 months later at the age of 84, and they were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, beneath a stone that reads simply, "Xavier and Victoria Jacobson, beloved husband and wife, together always." Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren would continue to tell their story for generations. The story of a woman fleeing across the desert and a cowboy who had the courage to help a stranger in need. The story of two people who found each other against all odds and built a life together that became a legacy of love, family, and enduring strength. It was a story that began with blood and fear, but ended with joy and peace, proving that even the darkest moments can lead to the brightest futures when two hearts find each other and hold on tight. The ranch continued to thrive under the management of their descendants, and the small house where it had all begun was carefully preserved as a reminder of where the family story started. On the anniversary of their wedding each year, the family would gather there, sharing the story once again of how Victoria had been running with blood down her legs, how Xavier had caught her horse and said, "Easy now, I have got you," and how those words had been the beginning of everything that mattered. It was a love story for the ages, born in the Wild West, tested by tragedy, and proven eternal through 4 decades of devotion. And that love continued on through every generation that followed, a living testament to the power of finding the right person at the right moment, and choosing to build a life together no matter what challenges might come.